Welcome to The Explainer. So get ready because today we are absolutely tearing down everything you think you know about how we communicate. We're diving into the incredibly explosive ideas of philosopher W.V.O. Quine, and specifically his masterwork, Word and Object. Quine proposes this thrilling, honestly almost dangerous philosophical idea. The language we use doesn't just describe our reality, it fundamentally dictates it. This isn't just dry philosophy, folks. It's a gripping, cognitive detective story about the very nature of truth, meaning, and existence itself. Moving right along to Section 1, the myth of exact meaning, or as we like to call it, dismantling the museum. So what does a word actually mean? For centuries, philosophers basically treated the human mind like a pristine museum. They imagined perfectly formed concepts just sitting on little mental pedestals, waiting for us to stick word labels on them. Well, Quine completely rejects this comforting illusion. He argues that language isn't built on private, subjective sense data. It's not like my inner idea of red is exactly the same as yours. Instead, language is entirely a social art. It is driven completely by the objective pull of our community. Society basically trains us, forcing us to conform our verbal behavior, so we're all responding to the same shared public objects. There's absolutely no private museum of meaning in your head. And to really grasp this, we have to look at Otto Neurath's famous boat metaphor. Quine loved this. He said we are literally like sailors who have to rebuild our ship on the open sea, piece by piece, while desperately trying to stay afloat on it. It brilliantly illustrates how we simply cannot step out of our own language to evaluate it from some magical, external, completely objective perspective. We have to fix our logic and our science from within the very linguistic boat that's keeping us afloat. Which brings us to Section 2, the Gavagai thought experiment, also known as radical translation. To prove meaning isn't just some fixed mental object, Quine sets a really fascinating scene. Picture this. You're a linguist dropped into a completely untouched society. You have zero dictionary, no translator app, nothing. You have to build a translation manual entirely from scratch, relying on literally nothing but the native speaker's overt physical behaviors. So you're standing next to a native speaker. Suddenly, a rabbit runs past. The native points right at it and yells, "Gavagai!" You pull out your notepad. How do you translate this? I mean, your immediate instinct is probably just to write down rabbit, right? But Quine asks us to hit the brakes and look closer at what is actually happening. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that Quine proves there are multiple completely valid analytical hypotheses here. Sure, you could translate it as rabbit, but you could also accurately translate it as undetached rabbit part, or maybe a temporary rabbit stage, like a temporal slice of the animal, or even the abstract concept of rabbithood. As totally absurd as undetached rabbit part sounds to us in normal conversation, all four of these wild interpretations perfectly match the native's physical behavioral dispositions. When the rabbit is there, they say yes. When it's not, they say no. Behaviorally, there is zero difference. And this leads us to Quine's most celebrated, mind-bending conclusion, the indeterminacy of translation. He states that reference is inscrutable. The profound implication here is that there is absolutely no objective fact of the matter about which translation is uniquely correct. The native speaker doesn't have some hidden, true meaning floating around in their brain that you're just trying to guess. You can actually build entirely different translation manuals that completely contradict each other. Yet they all flawlessly fit the exact same empirical evidence. Crazy, right? All right, Section 3, the messy reality of natural language, moving from childhood to ambiguity. Since we've established that meaning isn't perfectly fixed, you might wonder why our day-to-day language is so notoriously chaotic and vague. Well, to understand that, we just have to look at how we actually learn it. We go through 4 phases of reference. Think about a baby. When a child yells mama or red, they aren't naming a specific physical object. They're just responding to a stimulus, treating the word almost like ouch or brr. They then move to treating things as undivided qualities, like water or dirt. It's actually only in phase 3, when they finally master grammar, like plurals and articles, that they grasp divided reference, figuring out how to count distinct, separate objects. It's an incredibly messy, behavioral trial and error process. It is definitely not a magical downloading of dictionary definitions. So the crucial point is that because natural language grows out of this messy trial and error conditioning, it creates massive logical traps. One of the absolute biggest is called referential opacity. Let me explain. In a transparent context, if you say Tegucigalpa is warm, and you know Tegucigalpa is the capital of Honduras, you can swap those terms out. The capital of Honduras is warm. and the sentence stays completely true. But when we get into an opaque context involving human belief, that substitution completely fails. For example, if Philip believes Tegucigalpa is in Honduras, but Philip is totally ignorant of the fact that it's the capital, swapping the terms makes a true statement false. Philip doesn't necessarily believe the capital of Honduras is in Honduras if he doesn't know what the capital is. Human beliefs create this huge fog where strict logic just breaks down. Let's look at how to solve this in Section 4, Regimentation, the logical fix. You have to ask yourself, if everyday language is this ambiguous and full of logical black holes, how can science possibly function? Quine introduces his ultimate solution here, a necessary double standard. Now, colloquial English is fantastic and highly practical for grocery shopping or just chatting with friends. It's intentional, it's a bit vague, but it works. But for science, we absolutely must paraphrase our theories into a strict, canonical language. This scientific language has to be fiercely physicalistic, strictly extensional, and completely logically transparent. Absolutely no vagueness allowed. To build this perfectly rigorous scientific language, Quine strips our linguistic toolkit down to the absolute bare minimum. We only get a few things. We get predicates to describe traits and relations. We get variables to act as pronouns. We get basic truth functional connectives, like and or not, and we get quantifiers, like all or some. That is it. By restricting our language to literally just these minimal tools, we completely eliminate the need for confusing modalities like necessity, and we finally banish ghostly, intentional objects like propositions. It's basically extreme linguistic decluttering. One of the most brilliant tricks of this regimentation is how it handles things that don't actually exist. Take a proper name like Pegasus. In everyday language, just naming something kind of implies that it exists, right? Well, Quine shows we can mathematically convert the proper name Pegasus into a unique predicate. Is Pegasus. This is huge because it allows us to discuss non-existent entities without accidentally implying they actually exist in some magical shadow world. We are literally engineering the illusions right out of our vocabulary. And that brings us to our grand finale. Section 5. What actually exists? The ontic decision. Now that we've stripped language all the way down to perfect, ruthless logic, we can finally build up to the big question. What does this perfect language tell us actually exists in the universe? Quine answers with this monumental rule: no entity without identity. This is absolutely crucial. If we cannot state clear, objective criteria for when things are identical, those entities simply do not belong in science. Period. If a concept is just too blurry to be mathematically defined, it does not get a VIP pass into reality. Which leads directly to the most famous quote of his entire career, an absolute massive philosophical drop-the-mic moment. Ready? To be is to be the value of a bound variable. Let me translate that into plain English for you. It means that a scientific theory is only committed to the existence of entities if its mathematical variables absolutely must cover them for the theory to be true. Reality isn't determined by whatever words we happen to casually use. Reality is determined strictly by the math our best scientific theories rely on. So, what actually survives this strict test? According to Quine's logic, we are forced to accept physical objects and mathematical sets. Why? Because our best scientific theories literally cannot function without them. They are completely indispensable tools. But on the flip side, we have to completely reject abstract propositions, vague attributes, and the concept of a separate Cartesian dualist mind. Mental states, those are just physical states of the body. Everything else is basically just a useful linguistic fiction. I want to leave you with this final, really provocative thought: semantic assent. Quine shows us that endlessly arguing over what is real is essentially a trap. Instead of doing that, we must practice semantic assent. We need to elevate the debate and ask, how should we construct the language we use to describe reality? Because at the end of the day, our reality is fundamentally defined by the very words we choose to build our boat.
Please like and subscribe.